So my name is Sian. I'm the CEO and founder of Public Rally, and we bring business communities to life for a range of clients around the world. And today I'm going to talk to you about building communities of influence. And I just want to say hello to everyone tuning in online. Thank you also for being here. So I thought we could go on a journey together to explore what community building actually is, how you might do it for your organizations, and also how to measure it. And if you're asking yourself the question, what is the role of community on my organization, I'm hoping that we will get to that by the end of today. Like Ben, haven't been to a conference in a really long time, so bear with me while I warm up. So let's first dive into community, what it is, where it's come from, and why I think we're seeing it pop up in our business worlds today. But first of all, the definition. So community is who, not what. It's people coming together around a shared purpose, interest, or goal. But to put it in context, I actually think that community is just a fancy name for a group of people. But the question I'd ask myself is, do we have a group of people, first and foremost? So anyone with products or users, you probably have a group of people. And can we do something more useful with that group of people? So start there. Now, if we consider these groups for a moment, and if we use ourselves as an example, we're all people that work, but we work in businesses. We actually work mostly in technology businesses in the marketing function. So you can see where I'm going with this. I think our jobs are hard and lonely, and so it's valuable for us to be a part of something. And the more that you get into groups of relevance to us, it becomes more meaningful. And that's when I think you actually hit the sweet spot of community. We're all here to share, to grow, to connect and learn. And I think if we look at the Tech Marketers Group, it's a community of influence in our lives. So I think if we look at the outcome of community, it's twofold. To help achieve your business goals and objectives by helping the community achieve its mission and purpose. But we'll get to more on that a little bit later. For now, I want to build up to why I believe community is showing up in our business worlds and how to harness it while staying true to authenticity that the people in our communities want and value. Taking it back a little bit, so community is not new, it's been around for millennia. With our nomadic hunter-gatherer ancestors, they were groups formed out of necessity, out of kinship, with that being crucially important. It was people working together around that shared mission, purpose, and goal. They self-organized, they had to rely on each other, both hunting, gathering, populating, protecting, surviving, and thriving. From hunter-gatherer societies became farming communities and settlements, through to cities and towns that we live in today, to commerce and trade, the internet, and now the metaverse. Don't know where Ben's gone. A variety of worlds where community takes place in various environments, but at its nucleus is people. Through the decades, we've seen communities evolve from the more primitive, at the heart of the human condition, or the core of the human condition, to different types of communities that I think I like to separate into 4 areas. We have movements, hobbyists, businesses that are building communities around their product and service, and also category, industry, and role type. And I think we've seen examples of these right throughout history. So we've seen the American Civil Rights Movement, started by Martin Luther King, or not started by, but catalyzed, a group of people coming together to abolish slavery and racism and create fairness and equity for all. A little bit more close to home, we have the suffragette movement, a rallying cry for women all around from all walks of life to have equal rights of men, and obviously the right to vote. We've seen the power of mobilizing people, and we've seen how it can be used also, maybe perhaps negatively. The impact of community is far-reaching. Don't laugh. If we move into hobbyist communities, one that's a bit close to home for me was when is the Folsom Street Fair, and not for the reasons that you might think. What happened to me when I first moved to San Francisco in 2014, my very first day that I arrived, I cycled into the Folsom Street Fair, which takes over the entire Mission District. Imagine 400,000 people clad in not much. Leather, bondage, your imagination's probably going wild. So grown men walking around with leather on, all of that sort of stuff. While it was confronting for me, being a little Kiwi from this end of the world and perhaps our slightly conservative culture and upbringing, it's an ode to San Francisco's LGBT history. They raise funds and a lot of awareness for causes such as AIDS and gay rights. I think it's a great example about communities, that there are communities for everything, and that it's not something that you should or can put in a box. But at the core of community's DNA is shared identity, purpose, and interests. Another such community is fantasy football, where worldwide people come together to assemble imaginary teams of real life football players, and it's a significant recreational activity, but it's all online. As we start progressing into the business world and into the world of products and services, we're getting into more of the world that we're here to talk about today. Some of my favorite examples of businesses that are building communities around their product and services is Duolingo. 25 million monthly users, learning a language, and most of the languages on their app were actually crowdsourced by the communities themselves. They do 2,000 events every single month, and all of that is run by 2 people on the community team and a network of volunteers, which is pretty awesome if you think about it. Glossier, a blog started by Emily Weiss, Into the Gloss. So they're a $1 billion business now, but they started as blog, and they created products from listening to what their beauty community wanted to actually put on their face and body. If we look at Airbnb, which is quite a well-known one, they built a community of hosts, and the super hosts trained the next level of hosts to be better hosts. And they created a world-class experience for people like us that like to go stay in Airbnbs. In doing so with that community, they actually created more revenue for themselves, but they actually helped people, everyday people, turn one of their biggest assets into a steady stream of income, freeing up everyday people to live their best life, essentially, alongside their mainstream work. And the last one I thought I'd mention, because there's so many B2B people here, is Salesforce. Does anyone here use Salesforce? A few hesitant hands. So the Trailblazer community is their community, and there's over 11 million members now, and that community touches everything at Salesforce: revenue, retention, and they've created new career pathways for people, and that community is really sticky. Imagine managing a community of 11 million people. That's crazy. So last type I wanted to touch on is the communities that are centered around category, role type, or industry. I'm guessing some of you might look to see if you can create one of these to leverage community as both an acquisition tool, but also a retention tool in your companies. Some of my favorite examples, you sort of have the industry bodies like SASTA and CMX and Startup Grind, which group people together to help them grow, share, and learn. You also have Gainsight. Gainsight is a customer success platform, but they actually created the customer success category. And they did that with the Pulse community, a place where customer success managers could come learn, share, and connect with their peers. But they also obviously happen to be super aligned because of their product. And I think the last most obvious one is HubSpot, which they defined inbound marketing, and with it, they created a whole new generation of marketers. So now I'm going to do an exercise and change gears a little bit. Requires you to be a little bit vulnerable, so those hands should be right up, not shy. Can you raise your hand if in the last 2 years you've felt alone or lonely in your life or career? Okay, that's good, thank you. I'll get back to that a little bit later. So I think at the heart of community is people, and in my experience, you have the best chance of building a successful community if you tap into and deeply understand human nature, at the core of which is the desire to connect, belong, and love. To quote our girl, Brené Brown, I think connection is why we are here. It gives purpose and meaning in our lives, and belonging is in our DNA, and so tribe and belonging are irreducible needs like love. In my experience, what a lot of businesses get wrong when it comes to building a community is they forget one key thing, and that is community is first and foremost about people. We all feel. We all have wants, needs, challenges, desires, and goals. So I've been building communities for over a decade now, and the biggest thing that has helped my success to keep the community honest and authentic is actually tuning into and listening to intrinsic motivation of the people that the community is for and rallied around. I believe that this is where you and we should always start as community builders and marketers, and that's ultimately one of the reasons why I started Public Rally. So I'll tell you a little story. This is a very bad photo, but you can see the kiwi fern in here. When I was at the Kiwi Landing Pad in San Francisco, when I got my job as a community manager, I didn't actually know what it was, so I kind of made it up. And so the first thing that I did was have a classic drinks where I invited all the New Zealand and Australian entrepreneurs and operator community to get together. It was great the first time, but then the second time I did it, lots of people didn't come, and it was a much smaller event. And then I started really thinking about, well, why is that? And what I realized was that your quota for country kinship is usually a few times a year at best, and that in order to get these successful, thank you for laughing, I thought it was funny too. Yeah. So in order to get these successful, influential and connected people together to give back and help other Kiwis, I actually had to figure out what their motivator was. And their motivator was to help their country folk be as successful, if not more successful, than they had been before. And that was the magic. And I think in community building, it's counterintuitive because it's not revenue or ROI or any of those tangible things that our CFOs and CEOs want. But it's actually the thing that'll bring your community to life. What is that intrinsic motivator? And so by tapping into this, the few times a year actually became infinite, and it was meaningful in a way where it became about people helping people, rather than getting together over to have a beer, which is a tenuous patriotic tie at best. So let's get into the practical stuff now. I'm going to breeze through these so that you can note down and maybe investigate later. There are many frameworks that you can use to help shape your community, and these are some of the popular ones. I would research them and apply the one that actually best fits you, not just choose one because it's the only one that you can find. If you're in DevOps, you might like the Orbit model. If you're building something like WeWork, SoulCycle, Lululemon, or Peloton, the Pi model might actually work best for you. And I included my own framework that I designed for Public Rally, which centers around my community canvas, which I'll show you soon. In terms of mapping your community, I think there are 8 stages. What type of community do you want to build and why? What is the community purpose? That's not the business purpose, but they should be aligned. Where does it live, or where will they come to? How does it integrate across your business cross-functionally, but also externally in the industry as well? How do you attract new members and grow? Who is the community? Who are your users and members? Develop your community personas that might actually differ from your marketing personas and the types of activities that they might do. Who is the team that will bring it to life? And most importantly, how do you measure its success? I really like this community maturation model. I think it really helps crystallize and set expectations for the journey that you go on when you're building a community. It goes without saying, but community is a long tail, which sometimes is at odds with your lead gen and demand gen efforts, which MQL's good debate there. At the Kiwi landing pad, it took me about 5 years to do this, and with the community I'm building for Lawview at the moment, it's taken me about a year to get to stage 2. So I think most obviously, you start with giving people a place to come, and then you drive them through that engagement funnel. You obviously want to get to a place where you have high trust and direct collaboration, and the best way to do that is by working with your community to create what they need and aligning it back to your business. Bit rudimentary, but roll with it. This is my community canvas. It's a fairly simple way of mapping your community. On the left, you have your community funnel, and everything to the right of it is everything that you want to do, or the elements you need to drive people down that funnel and grow it. It often does include partnerships or other stakeholders that you need to connect with to make it happen, and your curation elements might look a little bit different depending on what type of community you're building. So if there's one slide that you might want to take a photo of, it'll probably be this one. This is your roadmap in a nutshell, a rapid MVP of sorts, and I'm happy to take questions on this a little bit later if we have time. So I've really kind of rushed through, but I might be catching us up. For the last 5 minutes, I thought I'd focus on what it looks like when you actually bring all of this together. 2 communities I've built and am building, they're distinctly different, but I more or less followed the same process. So we have the Kiwi landing pad, which is where I came from, and then InView, which is one of the communities that I'm building for Lawview. Lawview is an in-house legal technology workspace that we sell to corporate legal teams. Let's start with the purpose. So Kiwi Landing Pad's purpose was to support the best New Zealand founders' global growth aspirations with networks, information and access. It was a movement. Maybe not as inspiring as all the other ones, but it still was. The outcome for Kiwi Landing Pad was economic impact to New Zealand, solving problems with the data that we gathered and helping to create a more prosperous country where entrepreneurship was at the heart. For the community, it was about making the founder journey less lonely, democratizing some of the lessons and learnings that other people had from going before them, and also accelerating success with their access to talent, VCs, and everything else. InView's purpose, which is LawView's in-house legal community, is a community for in-house legal professionals to share, connect, and learn. The outcome for LawView, which goes back to what Amanda and Ben were talking about, is an owned data set on our future customers to build brand affinity for these people before they're ready to buy, and to change perception from being a vendor to a partner through things like thought leadership. The outcome for the community is the job being less lonely, making the job of in-house counsel easier. And do we have any recovering lawyers in the room? No one's going to admit that. So in an organisation, lawyers are usually the least liked, mainly because I think they're actually the least understood. And we're actually working to change that, allowing lawyers to give information back to their businesses so that those teams go, you're actually trying to help me instead of hinder me. You're trying to work in harmony with me, not just be a handbrake and say no. Turn them into the Department of Yes, which is what we all want to be. So another big thing for these people is career progression is a bit of a big one, having the tools on the network to progress, but also make the change that they want to see in the world. So if we look at them side by side and some of the key differences and lessons that I've learned, obviously Kiwi Landing Pad was a community that started offline and then moved online, and InView is the inverse. One is a movement and one is an industry and category play, and we won't hear about that because Bindy's not speaking, but she would have told you all about that. One, I was completely alone and had no team for 5 years, imagine that. And now I have a team and relatively quite a big budget, which is quite refreshing. I'm not going to read these all out, but you can really see the journey. I think one of the biggest things I've learned overall is the power of brand affinity and community building. So I would definitely overinvest in that because it does really help. And the reason for this is because it goes back to what I've been talking about earlier, being relatable at an intrinsic level. To zone in on InView a little bit, as it's more relevant to you guys as an audience, for year one, I focused on community growth and I provided them a place to come, mainly by creating content that was in the white space. So it was differentiated exactly what they wanted, and we leveraged the community to create that content with us so that they were sharing their experience and their credibility rather than us just talking about stuff that might have been seen as a bit more fluffy because we weren't the authority in the space. So what they wanted that, and the other thing that I did was double down on paid media spend on LinkedIn to grow that little bit quicker. So InView has gone from 0 to about 2,500 members in just under a year, which is pretty awesome. 25% of those are LawView customers, 75% are new to LawView. So if you think about your sales funnel and your marketing funnel, you're actually starting to get some pretty interesting information and data on people who have already had a positive experience with your brand and are building trust and credibility. But what's more, you're also able to subtly nurture them in your ways of working. So when it comes to sometime in the future, when they're looking for legal technology or they change jobs, LawView ideally will be that first platform, the platform of choice for them. And they're already sort of bought into that mission, maybe without knowing it as much. So year two, I started focusing on community growth and engagement, implementing all of our community programs and really looking at our community conversion funnel. I also started measuring our community impact on the business, and this is what I wanted to show you next. Who likes a good dashboard? Woo! So you'll hear a lot of community builders talk about how hard it is to measure things, and this is absolutely true. Maybe don't put this on social media. So if you're in B2B, I think it's actually much easier to measure your community if you put the right investment upfront into having the right technology to be able to measure your community. So for InView, on the ROI side, so you've got all of the nice, holistic, fluffy stuff, which I'm really for. But when you're talking to your CFO, your sales leaders, or your exec team, they want to know ROI and the revenue side of things. That's what I tried to figure out how to measure. So I care about three things: community influenced revenue, community sourced or new revenue, and community leveraged. Community influenced is where we're touching the community before the sale is closed. With our data set, that's obviously quite large, so that's bound to happen. And you can see that here. This number is actually up to about 580,000 for the year, which, given my budget, I've pretty much already offset it, which is pretty exciting. So in terms of community sourced and new, it's obviously new people to the business entirely. And community leveraged is an interesting one. When you can, so we know that we don't really like being sold to, but we do like buying. I think community is a great opportunity to have a different type of conversation with people. So I actually produce an in-house legal magazine, so I've turned into a publisher. So our SDRs message people on LinkedIn all the time and they say, hey, the next issue of our magazine is coming up, we'd love to feature you. So they say yes, and that's an example of a community leverage lead, using InView to get in the door with people, and that's been pretty successful. It seems counterintuitive to invest in an offline asset that's pretty expensive to produce, but that's paying dividends. And I even had a general counsel the other day say, hey, your magazine is actually the reason why I bought your software, because I thought it was that good and it really spoke to me in my job. So if you have a CRM, you can measure these things. And this thing here is really that, so I just log that they are a community member and when they joined their opt-in time, and that's how you can start pulling that data into your sales reporting. So once you start measuring these things, you can really cement your function in your business. Some of the other things of note here, so make sure that you measure your growth. If you're growing communities in certain countries, make sure that they're aligned to your go-to-market approach and that your role types align with your marketing via ICP. It might differ slightly. So for example, our use case is that we capture more junior people as they grow. So when they grow up, we obviously have their data and they change jobs, and that's where we get them and we track that over time. I think that's all on that one. So in wrapping up, the reason why I asked you if you've experienced loneliness is because I've been doing a lot of research around this lately. In a recent study by Harvard, they found that 36% of Americans are lonely, and the numbers around the world are fairly similar, if not worse. I think the part of the reason why we're seeing community pop up in our business world is as a result of this, in a desire to belong and be part of something that's authentic and matters to us. This is our greatest opportunity as community builders and marketers, and that's what I want to leave you with today. So figure out how to go forth and build your communities of influence that can serve your business goals, but also make the world a less lonely place by tapping into what is at the heart of us all, a desire to belong. That's it.